Now, for more on Trump's Latin American policies and how the region's reacting to them, I'm joined by Eric Farnsworth. He's Vice President of the Council of the Americas. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we know that Trump has already imposed sanctions on Venezuela, has had some choice words for Mexico and its people, whether it's trade or immigration, and also now this latest move with this special group of Haitians in the U.S. So how reflective are these actions of the Trump administration's overall relationship with Latin America?
Well, one of the things that we have to understand is the president came into office with a different worldview from some of the previous presidents, and he sees a lot of these issues through a domestic lens for domestic U.S. audiences, but they do have repercussions for audiences in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so things that are done perhaps for domestic reasons, whether it's on immigration or trade policy or something else, tend to reverberate in the region, and that's something that a lot of times proper attention hasn't been given to this point.
And what has the reaction been so far?
Well, it depends. It's really interesting. Latin America is not one big unified place, right? Every country is unique, every country is sovereign, and so it's different based on the policies towards individual countries. A country like Mexico is going to see things a lot different than a country like Brazil. So let me get specific. Comments about NAFTA being the worst trade agreement ever, which I don't believe is true, but nonetheless is something that's been put out there. That affects Mexico very directly. It doesn't really affect Brazil in any meaningful way. And the policies towards South America have been different. They've been much more focused on a traditional trade and economic engagement. Policies on immigration really affect Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean because these are populations that tend to come more to the United States because they're closer to the United States. And so it does vary by certain countries across the region. Some it's positive, some it's not very positive at all.
Now, if we're just looking at the economic impact, which Latin American countries have the most to lose, especially as Trump has his America First platform that he's trying to push?
Well, arguably Mexico, because the relationship between Mexico and the United States is the closest. It's the deepest and it's the largest. And so to the extent that that is reduced, Mexico has a lot to lose. I would hasten to say the United States has a lot to lose as well, not just on the economic side. We depend on Mexico for cooperation on security, on help on immigration flows, on help on counterterrorism issues, counter-narcotics. So it goes well beyond just the economic relationship. But from a strictly economic perspective, it's probably Mexico. Again, the farther away geographically you get from the United States, the less close that economic linkage is. So losses might exist, but they're not going to be as catastrophic, perhaps.
And what are some of the ways that the U.S. either gains or loses out by having this either very aggressive or passive relationship with Latin America?
Well, from my perspective, we gain a lot by having good relations with the rest of the region, not the least of which is the economic and trade side, which we've been talking about. You know, Canada is our top trade partner. Mexico is our our second largest export market and our third largest trade partner. Latin America together is about 40% of U.S. Trade globally. So it's huge. We trade more with the region than we do, frankly, with many other countries combined. So this is a region that, if we take for granted, is going to look for alternatives, and alternatives exist. You mentioned China. There are others. Certainly Europe is a traditional partner of Latin America too. So the region is open for business, right. And it's incumbent on the United States, in my view, to try to be a good partner, to try to gain some of that economic benefit.
And as the U.S. does seem to pull back or have a more antagonistic relationship, what sort of opportunities does that open up for China?
Well, I think it opens up a lot of opportunities. Latin America is a region that needs a lot of investment, particularly on infrastructure, particularly on issues like energy, clean energy. There's a huge opportunity for investment in clean energy. Latin America actually has a very impressive clean energy matrix in terms of hydroelectricity and in terms of some of the other things. But China is a global competitor in things like solar panels and equipment such as this. That's a real opportunity. What China has to understand about Latin America, and we've talked about this before, is that Latin America has its own ways of doing things, right? There's rule of law, there's democracy, there are traditions there that really need to be that investors need to be mindful of. The United States has learned that over many years of engagement. China's learning that. And so as you engage more as an investor, you learn how to do things according to the local economy. And I think that's probably the next stage of investment. But in the context of what the opportunities are, from my perspective, they're huge.
And especially we know that China is working on its Belt and Road Initiative, involving a lot more globalization, something that we've seen the U.S. pull back from. What could the Belt and Road Initiative mean for the Latin American region?
You know, this is a really interesting question. It's fascinating to me because Belt and Road, of course, is for the Eurasian landmass, and Latin America is very far away geographically, right? So it's not connected geographically, but Belt and Road being more of a concept and more of a strategy of engagement globally, I think has a lot to do with the Western Hemisphere, with Latin America, to the extent it is concerned with infrastructure investment, to the extent it's concerned with building economic ties. And we've seen Latin America hungry for that. We've seen, for example, just recently, the state visit of the President of Panama to China, and Belt and Road was very clearly discussed. Panama, of course, being the home of the Panama Canal. So there's a lot of engagement there that's possible. It does have to be tended to and nurtured because, again, the two regions are very far apart geographically, and it's easy to not necessarily keep one or the other as a priority unless that is intentionally done. So that's going to have to be part of the challenge, I guess, of exporting Belt and Road, if you will, to Latin America and the Western Hemisphere. But from a perspective of a strategic approach, I think the region is interested in that, and to the extent the U.S. might be pulling back, again, there's opportunity for others.
Certainly a lot of shifting dynamics there
yes,
to
indeed,
explore.
absolutely.
Thank you, as always, Eric Farnsworth, Vice President of the Council of the Americas.